Hi, everybody. It's Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, the book podcast initiative that was started right when lockdown came, when many writers, myself included, lost their tours, bookstores shuttered their doors, and all of us were just sort of floating. I'm really excited about today because we have a wonderful guest. Karen Palmer. Here's her book. She's under here. It's an extraordinary story, and I'll introduce it in a minute. But first, I have to tell you some housekeeping stuff. If you look to the right, you can see a chat. There's all kinds of stuff that I already put there. If you have any questions for Karen, don't be shy. Just post them up, pop them up in the chat. You don't even have to speak. I'll do it for you. We at Mighty Blaze love you to buy your books at independent bookstores. That's who we support. So you can go there and you can buy She's Under Here and all the rest of Karen's wonderful books. Or to make it easy for you, I put up a link to bookshop.org where you can buy it. Oh, you already have one person. Liz Relland says, "Hey, Carrie." So there we go. All right. So let's talk
someone
about
who knows my other name.
Oh, well, we're going to talk about names and the power of names in a bit. So let me tell you a little bit about Karen first. This is one of those books where, I get a lot of ARCs that come through the door. And one of the joys of this particular job is I get to choose who I want to talk to. I wanted to talk to Karen when I was like 5 pages into this book. That's how great it is. So Karen Palmer is a Pushcart Prize winner, and she's received grants from NEA and the Colorado Council on the Arts. She's Under Here grew out of her award-winning essay, The Reader is the Protagonist, great title, first published in Virginia Quarterly Review and selected by Leslie Jameson for inclusion in Best American Essays 2017. She is the author of the novels All Saints and Border Dogs. More recently, her short story, Birds of Paradise, won the 2022 Emily Clark Belch Prize for Fiction. Her work has appeared in the Rumpus, the Kenyon Review, Arts and Letters, and Calliope, and more. Let me read you some of the praise for this book. Palmer's background as a fiction writer is impressively evident in the crafting of this book, as are the many years she had to sit with the implication of her actions. This is not just a thrilling story, but also a forensic accounting of a situation whose moral complexities might be easily pushed under the rug, but Palmer examines them thoroughly. The Washington Post, from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Throughout the harrowing She's Under Here, Palmer asks herself what makes a mother. Where she lands and how she gets there makes for a truly compelling reading. She's Under Here is this astounding memoir of a woman who had to change her identity and her children's to escape an abusive husband. Without money, without help, they fashioned their own kind of witness protection program. It's just a profoundly brave book, and I'm just thrilled to have Karen Palmer here. So welcome, Karen. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Caroline. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so let's start. The first thing about this book that got me was the subtitle, which is A Love Story, a Horror Story, a Reckoning. And it's important to know in this age where sometimes books can veer on the side of torture porn, that there is so much love in this book. The love you have for your children, the love you have for your second husband, the love you initially had for Gil, your first husband. So what I wanted to know is if you could just tell us, when did this book come about, and how did this book come about, and how brave did you have to get to start writing it?
Well, the events that are recounted in the book actually happened about 35 years ago.
Okay.
Most of them, although there is in the second half of the book, which is The Reckoning, it catches up more to the present time. So I always knew I had a story with this particular thing that had happened to me. And, lots of people have bad marriages, and there are abusive husbands out there. And it is unfortunately too common a story. But I had this additional thing where I went kind of way beyond what people most do in order to escape, where I completely changed my identity. And my new husband changed his identity, and we had the two kids with us. And we started over in Boulder, Colorado, with, no bank accounts, no ID, no resumes for getting jobs. It's just sort of nothing. And I knew there was a story in it. So yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible. You also said what I found really interesting, that you had all kinds of jobs, especially typography, which helped you in forging your new identity. So here's a two-part question. First, how did it help? And what other job helped you? And how were you able to not give up hope?
Uh, well, when you talk about the love in the book, that's
Right.
why I didn't give up hope. Um, it's common with people that run. They're alone. A lot of times it's just a woman and her
Right.
children, or the woman alone. And I had a family unit to be with, and I had a man that really loved me, who gave up his entire life to do this with me. Uh, and so I was able to do it because of that. Um, in terms of the job, I had worked in a graphic design studio, and they had in-house typography. In those days, you used to do it on this big, desk-sized piece of equipment, and it had a drum that you put the typeface on, and it took pictures of it. It was like photography in order to do typography. So I got very used to recognizing typefaces and understanding how to space things. And so that helped me do the paperwork that provided the false ID.
Did you ever have any close calls where people looked at your forged documents or looked at you a little squirrel-eyed or
It's interesting. We were in such fear of doing it that we didn't actually get our phony ID for an entire year after we ran.
oh my god.
Yeah. So because we just kept getting scared. I had done the documents, and we couldn't make ourselves go to Social Security. So what we eventually had to do is we had to come up with these stories about why we were people in our 30s with no Social Security numbers. So my husband, my second husband, was sitting in his car. We had to do it. He was sitting in his car and sweating, and thinking, what am I going to do? They're going to, they're going to bring the security people in and haul me off. So he thought, he had been an actor when he was young, and he thought, well, use the fear. So he went in and acted as if he had some mental problems, and that he had never had a Social Security number. He had always worked for cash under the table, and that his current boss said, you have to have a number. So he told the woman behind the desk, he said, I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. And she took pity on him and helped him fill out the forms. And, so like there was a certain amount of ingenuity that we had to exercise. I told him when I went that I had taken up with an older man when I was quite young, which was certainly true enough,
True.
and that I had never worked, which was not true, and that we broke up, and now I needed to get a job. And here I was in my 30s, and I had never had a Social Security number, because in those days you didn't get it when you were an infant. Now everybody gets it when they're born. But when I was a teenager is when I got my real Social Security number, because I had a job. So
Did you, as you were moving around, were you able to make friends, or were you able to trust anybody outside of your circle? How did you cope with that?
we did make friends. We were a very self-contained family for a long time, because it was the four of us. But we weren't hiding in the house. We both had
Okay.
jobs, and the kids went to school. One of the things I did with them is when I went to enroll them in school, I said that I had homeschooled them
Oh, that's so smart.
rather than, having to show up with a transcript. So, and I think we were believed in no small part because we looked like just kind of ordinary middle classish white people.
That's so interesting. Did you
Yeah.
feel you were acting? I know you said your husband, your second
Mm.
husband. Did you feel like you were acting?
Some of the time, yeah. Some of the time.
There's this terrifying, I think the most terrifying part of this book is where Gil, your first husband, takes your child and he's supposed to bring the child back. And I think it was for a week. Am I right?
9 days.
9 days where you didn't know where that child was. That was that was so hard to read because it was so evocative. When you were writing that, was it difficult to write to revisit those emotions?
Yes. Yes.
It's unbelievable. I mean, that is every mother's nightmare. And every mother I know, we've all had those moments where, you're in the supermarket or in the street
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you don't know where your kid is.
Right.
And usually, 99% of the time you find them, but there's always that moment when you think, what am I going to do if I don't?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask sort of an odd question. I was always wondering if Gil were still alive, would you have written this book anyway? And what would he have thought? Would he have read it or?
Well, no, I wouldn't have written it because I was really terrified that he would find me. So, I tried to write it as a novel twice.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. I want to hear about that. Okay.
Yeah, where I took my situation and I disguised it and tried to turn it into a novel. And it just, it rang so false. I worked on it for a long time, and having written 2 other novels, I thought, well, I can do this, and I have the material, and I'll make a novel of it. And it was a bad novel, and so I set it aside. And it wasn't until much later that I realized, I never had any interest in writing a memoir, ever, ever. But I had this burning story, and I thought, well, maybe I should try to tell it, kind of straight up, tell it true.
Isn't it also claiming yourself, your real identity, your real self in writing this memoir?
Sure.
I think that's why it's so powerful and profound. It's, they always say that if there's something you're afraid of writing, then that's what you should be writing about.
I think that's true. Yeah.
That's like one of my favorite things. You said that finding a publisher was nerve-wracking. Yeah. Now, I can virtually see every single writer out there who is listening, nodding and being nervous. We all know, and you and I talked about this before we got on screen, that, writing is really, the publishing is really difficult right now. Yes. So can you talk about that a little, like how this book, because the book is out now and it's doing tremendous and it's getting great reviews, which is so gratifying and so wonderful. So tell us about your process.
Well, I had different drafts of it. It took me 13 years to write, off and on, where I had, the vomit version, as writers like to say, where you just spill everything that happened and see what you have at the end of it.
Right.
And then, and I worked on that for a long time once I had the material, because I thought I would tell this story about having escaped. But that was not a satisfying ending, because over the course of those 13 years of writing it, I realized that what happened after we ran was just as important as the stuff before.
That's right.
And once I had that realization, then it changed the way I went about trying to finish it. But it was still, it was a devil to sell. It's like I still wasn't finished with it. And my agent said, well, let me try to sell it on a proposal. So I spent, as people do, I spent like 4 months writing a proposal. And I had so much trouble with the chapter summaries. And, I had my sample and all that. And everybody said no. And I got so discouraged that I put it aside yet again. And at some point, my agent said, why don't you pull it out and try to actually finish it to your own satisfaction?
That's so smart.
And then, depending on what it looks like, I will try to sell it as a full. And once she did that, then we were off to the races.
That's great. That's great. I want to talk more about living under a false identity. You really forged your own witness protection service, which is something that virtually everyone thinks about once in a while when things are tough. But in becoming someone else, you said you actually found your truest self.
Right.
Can you talk about that? Because that's so interesting to me.
I had spent so much of my life being what other people told me I was. And, it's like my parents, I had in some ways a difficult upbringing. My mother was a very domineering and difficult person. Um, I loved her, but she was impossible. And my father was an alcoholic. So, and I was an only child and I was adopted. So the family dynamic was very fraught. Um, and then I escaped by taking up with this man that was so much older than me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went from my parents to having this man tell me who I was. So, I had my two children. Uh, the marriage disintegrated. I eventually started another relationship. I left my husband. And that's when he went completely nuts and, stalked and threatened and did, and kidnapped our younger girl, did all
It's
that stuff.
terrifying. Terrifying. So, when you were raising your kids through all of this, were you aware that were you aware, or were you worried that your kids would not be able to recognize what a good person might be for them as they were growing up? We all, any of us who have had a terrible upbringing. I remember when I had my son, my husband and I sat down and said, we're not going to do this that was
Yeah.
done to us. We're not going to do this.
Yeah.
Did you have that awareness, and how hard was it to figure out what to do when you hadn't had that experience, and that experience of having a good parent yourself?
You know what? I actually took to mothering in a way that felt very natural. And through all this terrible stuff that happened, um, the kids, the kids were remarkably well adjusted. And
Yeah, they seem that way. They seem that way
yeah,
in the book.
yeah, and they're wonderful. They're 44 and 39 now, and they are wonderful, wonderful women. And they just are so who they are. Like they're not afraid of being who they are. And I spent so much of my life afraid that I guess, whether by design or just by osmosis, they absorbed, the lesson, be who you are. And it's not that we didn't have, it's like you have the teenage years and you have, child rearing is not always a picnic, but
Right.
but we gave them a stable household, and I think it worked out well in terms of them being well adjusted and not being kind of crazed over this thing that happened to them.
What was their reaction to, have they read this book? Did
You
it
know,
bring up emotional turmoil, or they must think you're very brave?
they have been so supportive. The whole family has been so supportive. It's like they're they knew it was something that I had to do, and they never said, please don't do it. My older daughter is a fairly public person in Washington, D.C. She ran for city council,
That's
and
great.
yeah, I was in the throes of composing this, and she never once said, don't do it, Mom. You could cause me problems. Because,
That's great.
as a candidate, this is kind of a weird background. So, but no, they were completely supportive.
That's great. I want to ask about your earlier novels, All Saints, and Border Dogs, which are they both seem to share a theme to me. Who are we, especially in relationships with
Mm.
other people? I wanted to know, where were you in your life while you were writing those two books?
Well, All Saints, I got the idea for it and started writing it after a visit that my current husband and I and the 2 kids took to Florida to see his parents. This was several years into our disappearance when we felt like we could do that. So we went to visit. We still didn't tell them where we were, and they had no address. But we went to visit them because they were both ill. And on the drive back to Colorado from Florida, it was a hard visit. It was melancholy making, and we decided to take a detour to New Orleans, just for the fun of it. And we were sitting in the Café du Monde, and it was boiling hot, and I was watching a priest over in St. Louis Cathedral across the whatever that street is there, in his black cassock, walking back and forth in front of the cathedral. And like all of a sudden I had this character, this priest who has lost his faith and has returned to the New Orleans of his youth in disgrace. So I think, all that stuff was simmering. All the stuff that we did comes out in the novels. They are both about identity. And I thought when I wrote them that they had nothing to do with me, but of course,
that's never the case, is it? It's always about you. It's like Flaubert says, Madame Bovary is me. It's so interesting that you started to write, because I kept thinking, if when you were with Gil, I would imagine he would be very protective and not want you to write anything, because you can become different people, and he wouldn't have that control over you. So it's really lucky that you broke free from that. I always want to know if you build on what you have here for your next book. I know that are there certain things that you've learned from writing this book that you can apply to your next book?
Yes. I think in some ways, I'm a better writer after having written this book, as long as it took, because I thought about storytelling in a different way than I did when I was writing the other 2. Well, one of the books is a mystery. So it's not a formulaic mystery, but it's a mystery. So there are certain conventions. And I was, I wanted to write about a Border Patrol agent who was half Latino and half Anglo, and having the worst of all possible jobs for someone with that particular heritage. And this is years before all the stuff that's going on now at the border. So, so I was interested in how did he think about himself as a good person? And he had this very difficult, background. Again, it's a murder mystery. So there are different things that happen over the course of the story. But they were easier to write than novels. This was so much harder to write that I learned so much more. And so
that's always the way, isn't it?
Yeah, so I feel like something that I can take into the next novel is kind of a freedom to take some chances, to trust my intuition a little more than I used to, and not second guess things so much, to feel like I will follow the story in a more organic way.
What would everybody out there be really surprised to learn about you?
Let's see.
It's a trick question.
Well, I trained as a classical pianist.
Oh, so do you still play? I do still play.
Wow. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, we moved from where we were living back to Los Angeles, and our apartment was very small, so I couldn't bring my piano. So we had no piano here for a very long time. And then I went to Yaddo, and they happened to give me a studio space that had a Steinway Grand in it.
Oh, wow.
And I hadn't played in years, and I started playing again. And when I got home, I said, I'm just going to buy some kind of cheap banger, and we're going to stick it in the dining room. We won't have a dining room anymore, but I have to have a piano. And it is such a respite from the writing.
I can imagine.
Because it's nonverbal.
It's nonverbal, and yet it's very emotional, so that can feed against each other. Tell us like what a typical day is like for you. Do you write in the morning? Do you outline? It's different every day, right?
I am a really lazy writer.
No, I can't believe that.
Yes, I'm very lazy. I write when my back is to the wall or when I'm so fed up with myself that I can't live with myself anymore. So I don't have a routine unless I'm really in the thick of it. And if I am in the thick end of it, then I write in the morning because
Okay.
I'm useless later in the day.
What's the worst advice you've ever received?
Mm. You know, when I was working on All Saints, my first novel, I belonged very, very briefly to a writers group. And it was, I don't know, maybe it was a pretty large group. It was like 8 to 10 people. And there was a woman in there who was a very well-known mystery writer. And we would give the chapters and people would read the chapters and do the critique. And the very first time I was up, she was the first person to speak. And she leaned down this table to look at me and she said, "Dear, you need to figure out what your story is about." And a week later, I got an NEA grant based on that book.
Oh, that's so great. I love it.
So,
I love it. Writers groups do have that appalling tendency sometimes. You have to be really careful what group you get into. Did you tell her that you got the grant?
no, I didn't stay. I never went back. So,
Oh, you never went back. Okay.
Yeah. So I have
That
luck
is,
with writers groups.
I have a very important question for you, which is, what advice do you have for women who might be suffering under domestic abuse? And I think it's also important to reveal that domestic abuse isn't always physical, it can be emotional as
Right.
well.
Right.
What would you advise them to do? I know in the back of this book, actually, there are some resources that are really
Yeah.
great.
The thing that strikes me now that I wish I had known when I was younger, I didn't know anyone, I didn't know anyone had been abused. It didn't mean that they weren't. It's that I didn't know it.
Right.
And I never went to a shelter because I wasn't beaten. The abuse was relentless, but it was mostly psychological. Some of it was physical later on, but and it was terrorizing. So what I would tell women to do is look out there. There's someone you can talk to. There's a sisterhood of women who have been through this. And if you are open to it, I wasn't open to it, partly out of ignorance and partly out of pride. But if you can open yourself, you will find someone who will listen to you and perhaps be able to help you. And that's the first step to getting out.
That's really important. Thank you for saying that. You said that your husband, I love this phrase, your husband loved you into a new life, which is as profound as it's amazing. What I want to know is, how were you ever able to trust that love in the beginning after what you had been through with Gil?
Well, because he had been through it too. It's like he was threatened and we had known each other. We had been friends for 14 years. I knew him almost as long as
Okay.
I've known my husband. So we spent many years not in the slightest thinking of each other in any kind of romantic way. We were just very, very, very good friends. And then both of our marriages kind of disintegrated at the same time. And we sort of looked at each other and it was like, oh, 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 you mean something to me.
That's the best thing of all. That's the
Yeah.
best thing. That's actually the one piece of advice my mom gave me that ever was really worthwhile. She said, be friends with whoever you're going to marry first.
Yeah.
Because she said the other stuff just, it can bleed out. But if you have that basis, then you're good to go. I would love for you to tell us about this place you worked for, Lighthouse Writers.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what that is and what it does and how people can find information about it. And also, anybody out there, if you have questions, you can get them in now. Don't be shy.
Lighthouse Writers is in Denver, Colorado, and it was started by Andrea Dupree and Michael Henry about 20 years ago. And they ran it out of their house initially. It was one of these community-based writing programs. They had both gone to Emerson. They had MFAs, and when they moved to Colorado and started their family, they wanted to have this atmosphere that was supportive of writers, and it was very, very small. And over the years has grown. They now have, their own like 3-story building in Denver, and they have 200 instructors, and they offer all kinds of classes. In the summertime, they run something called Lit Fest, which brings in writers from all over the place and agents and editors, and there are wonderful presentations, and it's just a great organization with very kind and supportive people. So
you have a comment from Zenith. What a great name. She said, your husband is the best co-worker.
Oh, hi, Zenith. Yes. It is.
I have one last question, which actually tells everybody more about me than it does about you, which is, what's obsessing you now and why?
Well, I'm obsessed with 2 different things. I'm obsessed with the new novel that I'm working on.
Can you talk about that? Can you talk about the new novel, or no? You don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah, I think, well, I can say just that it's loosely based on this case of these 2 Dutch girls that went missing in 2014 in Panama while they were hiking the Continental Divide. And it was like a huge thing in the press at the time. And it was, like the beautiful blonde Hollandesas, while there were Panamanian women, missing here and there all the time, all over the place, and there's no attention to that. So I wanted to kind of transpose the story and make it 2 American sisters who are 10 months apart but look like twins. And there have been documentaries made and all this kind of stuff. Nobody has ever really been able to figure out for sure what happened to those 2 young women. But I have my own solution for what happened.
Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, so I want to show this gorgeous cover again. She's under here. Don't forget that I put up the link for a bookshop.org. Very easy to remember. They'll tell you the nearest indie bookstore, or you can just walk into your bookstore and buy all the books. I want to tell people that don't forget that this particular interview is going to live forever on a Mighty Blazes YouTube channel, so you can watch it again. And you can, tell your friends, and it'll probably be a podcast in a few months. I want to thank all of you for being here, and I especially want to thank Karen Palmer for being here and for writing this profoundly brave and actually exhilarating novel. It's full of hope. It's just full of hope. So thank you all. You're so welcome. Thank you all. We'll see you all next time. And Karen, you just hang around.
Okay.